The night Ethan Caldwell finally realized someone inside his own family wanted his company, he was not the first person to discover the betrayal. His 12-year-old daughter heard it first. 2 years had passed since Nora Caldwell died in a highway accident, leaving one of Chicago's most respected business leaders to raise their daughter alone while guiding Caldwell Meridian into becoming one of America's fastest-growing healthcare technology companies. Ethan had learned to survive by filling every empty hour with work. Board meetings replaced family dinners. Investor calls stretched late into the night. Every promise he made to Sophie was sincere when he said it, yet too many disappeared beneath another emergency before he could keep them. The only promise he had refused to break was tonight. Caldwell Meridian was celebrating its 20th anniversary with a private gathering at its headquarters overlooking the Chicago River. And Ethan had told Sophie that no matter how busy the evening became, she would remain beside him. It was also the anniversary of the last company celebration they had attended with Nora before the accident. Sophie wore a simple navy dress her mother had bought only weeks before she died. Around her neck hung Nora's old camera, one Ethan had never been able to put away because its leather case still carried a faint scent of cedar. Before the guests arrived, Ethan knelt beside his daughter near the grand staircase and adjusted the strap resting on her shoulder. "Your mom loved this place," he said quietly. Sophie smiled, although her eyes drifted toward the giant company logo suspended above the ballroom. "She always said buildings don't matter," Sophie replied. "The people inside do." Ethan held her gaze for a moment before forcing a smile. She was usually right. As executives, investors, and longtime employees filled the ballroom beneath crystal lights, Ethan moved from conversation to conversation, thanking partners and welcoming people who had supported the company since its earliest days. Standing only a few feet away were the relatives he trusted more than almost anyone alive. His older brother, Richard Caldwell, spoke confidently with board members about the company's future. His younger sister, Lauren Caldwell, greeted major investors with effortless charm. Their mother, Margaret Caldwell, accepted congratulations from longtime employees who still called her the heart of the Caldwell family. Watching them together, no one would have imagined conflict between them. Sophie wandered quietly through the reception, carrying her mother's camera, taking candid photographs instead of staring at a phone like most children her age. She captured employees laughing, engineers embracing former mentors, and one image of her father smiling more naturally than she had seen in months. She almost returned to him when the camera case hanging from her shoulder suddenly felt unusually light. She opened it and froze. The card slot was empty. Thinking she might have left the card upstairs while looking through old family photographs before the event, she slipped away from the ballroom without telling anyone. The executive floor above the celebration was nearly silent compared with the music echoing below. Sophie retraced her steps through the empty hallways until she reached a private conference suite where the family had gathered before the guests arrived. The door stood slightly open. As she bent to look beneath a chair for the missing card, familiar voices drifted through the narrow opening. Richard spoke first. "By tomorrow morning, Ethan won't have enough voting power to stop us." Lauren answered calmly. "Once the trust shares transfer, it won't matter what he wants." Margaret's voice followed after a long silence. "Are you certain Sophie never has to know?" Sophie stopped breathing. Then Lauren gave a quiet laugh that chilled her more than shouting ever could. "She doesn't even know her own name has already been used." Sophie had heard her family planning to steal her father's company, but the most terrifying part was learning they had already used her name to do it. She stayed crouched beside the conference room door, afraid that even the sound of her breathing might expose her. Inside, Richard lowered his voice and asked whether the transfer would survive legal review. Lauren answered without hesitation. "By the time anyone questions it, Ethan will already be out." Margaret sounded less certain. "She is 12 years old. I agreed to protect the trust, not deceive her." Lauren's reply came cold and controlled. "You signed as trustee. That is all the board needs." Sophie backed away before anyone opened the door. Her missing memory card no longer mattered. She hurried toward the elevator, gripping her mother's camera so tightly that the leather strap pressed into her palm. Downstairs, the anniversary celebration continued as though nothing had changed. Music played beneath the crystal lights. Employees raised glasses to 20 years of Caldwell Meridian. Ethan stood near the stage, speaking with two hospital executives, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed the greatest danger facing him was the next morning's board presentation. Sophie pushed through the crowd and caught his sleeve. "Dad, I need to tell you something." Ethan looked down and immediately saw the fear in her face. He excused himself and guided her into a quiet hallway. Sophie told him everything: the trust transfer, the emergency vote, and Lauren's claim that her name had already been used. Ethan listened without interrupting, but as she spoke, disbelief slowly replaced concern. "Sophie, are you sure they weren't discussing estate planning?" he asked. "No. Uncle Richard said you wouldn't have enough votes to stop them." Ethan crouched to meet her eyes. "Your grandmother manages part of your trust until you turn 18. Sometimes she signs documents on your behalf. That doesn't mean anyone is stealing anything. They said I didn't know my name had been used." For a moment, Ethan's expression tightened. Then he glanced toward the ballroom, where Margaret was laughing with several longtime employees. "My mother would never use your name to hurt you," he said. Sophie felt something inside her sink. "You don't believe me." "I believe you heard something," Ethan answered gently. But conversations through a door can sound different when you don't know the full context. Before Sophie could respond, Margaret appeared at the end of the hallway. She approached with a warm smile that vanished when she saw Sophie's face. Ethan explained that Sophie had overheard part of a discussion about the family trust. Margaret placed a hand over her granddaughter's. "Sweetheart, adults sometimes talk about complicated things in ways that sound frightening." Her voice was soft and practiced. "Since your mother died, you have been worried that something else might be taken from you. That fear can make ordinary words feel dangerous." Sophie pulled her hand away. She wanted her father to defend her, but Ethan only said they would review everything in the morning. Margaret kissed Sophie's forehead and returned to the party. Minutes later, Ethan was called back to the stage. Sophie remained alone in the hallway, watching him disappear beneath the lights. Near the wall, a printer tray held schedules prepared for an emergency board session just after midnight. One page had slipped on the floor. Sophie picked it up and saw the list of attendees. Richard, Lauren, Margaret, Charles Bennett, and every voting director were included. Ethan Caldwell's name had been crossed out in red. At the bottom, a system notice showed that the voting authority attached to Sophie's trust was scheduled to activate at exactly midnight. At 11:42 p.m., Sophie discovered that her mother had known someone might one day use the family against Ethan, and she had left behind a warning no one was supposed to find. Still holding the board schedule, Sophie slipped away from the hallway before another guest noticed her. She knew showing the page to her father would not be enough. Ethan had already chosen an innocent explanation because believing his family was dangerous would mean questioning everything he trusted. Sophie needed proof that could not be dismissed as a frightened child misunderstanding an adult conversation. She returned to the private lounge where she had left her coat and emptied the camera case onto a small table. A spare battery, a lens cloth, and an old silver key fell out, but the missing card was nowhere inside. Then Sophie noticed a narrow seam beneath the case lining. Her mother had once taught her that the safest hiding places were not the ones people could not see, but the ones they believed they had already checked. Sophie pulled gently at the leather edge and uncovered a tiny hidden pocket. Inside was a second memory card marked with a faded blue dot. She inserted it into the camera and found dozens of ordinary photographs from the final months of Nora's life. Sophie asleep on the couch, Ethan grilling in the backyard, and the Chicago skyline after rain. Then a video file appeared with a date from 3 days before the accident. Nora sat alone in her home office, looking directly into the camera. She seemed tired, but her voice was calm. "Sophie, if you are watching this, something has happened that I hoped never would." Sophie's throat tightened. Nora explained that the shares placed in Sophie's trust had been designed to protect the company's long-term mission, not to give any relative a weapon against Ethan. She had created an emergency safeguard that would freeze any transfer if the trust were used to remove Ethan or force a sale without independent review. Families can love each other and still make terrible choices when fear and money become the same thing, Nora said. Do not decide who is guilty before you understand what they are afraid of. The safeguard was linked to a backup account hidden outside the company's normal network. To open it fully, Sophie would need information connected to 3 family memories: the place Ethan proposed to Nora, the song playing when Sophie was born, and the name Sophie gave the oak tree behind her first home. Nora did not reveal the answers. She said Sophie would know them because they belonged to moments no executive could fake. As the video ended, a small file appeared beneath it labeled Emergency Trust Review. Sophie tapped it, but the camera displayed a secure login request and a warning that the account had been accessed less than 1 minute earlier. She stared at the timestamp. Someone inside Caldwell Meridian had entered the backup system at the exact moment she began watching Nora's message. Footsteps sounded outside the lounge. Sophie removed the hidden card and slipped it inside her shoe just before the door opened. Richard Caldwell stood in the doorway, smiling as though he had simply come to find his niece. His eyes moved from the camera in her hands to the loosened lining of the case on the table. "There you are," he said softly. "Your father is looking for you." Then his smile faded by the smallest degree. "What did you find on your mother's camera?" Richard's question told Sophie something more frightening than any threat could have. He already knew there was something on the camera worth finding. She forced herself not to look down at the shoe hiding the memory card. "Just old pictures," she said. Richard stepped into the lounge and closed the door behind him with quiet care. At 47, he had the polished calm of a man who had spent years speaking in boardrooms where every word mattered. He picked up the empty camera case and examined the hidden lining Sophie had pulled loose. "Your mother was always careful," he said. "Sometimes too careful." Sophie held the camera against her chest. "Why were you talking about using my shares?" Richard did not deny it. Instead, he sighed and sat in the chair across from her, softening his voice. "Because your father is exhausted. He has been making decisions alone for 2 years, and no one wants to admit how much grief has changed him. He is still the CEO. For now." Richard leaned forward. "Sophie, protecting someone does not always look kind from the outside. Your grandmother believes Ethan needs time away. Lauren believes the company needs stability. I believe both things can be true." Sophie remembered Nora's warning about fear and money becoming the same thing. "Then why did you use my name?" Richard's expression barely moved, but the silence lasted too long. "Your grandmother has legal authority over the trust. No one forged your signature. Lauren said I didn't know my name had been used. Lauren says things badly when she is under pressure." He smiled again, but this time it did not reach his eyes. "The important thing is that no one is trying to hurt you or your father." Sophie looked toward the closed door. "Then why is Dad's name crossed off the emergency board schedule?" For the first time, Richard's composure cracked. Only for a second, but Sophie saw it. He stood and held out his hand. "Give me the schedule." "Why?" "Because it is confidential. Because it proves what I heard." Richard lowered his voice. "Sophie, your father has enough pressure tonight. If you take half-understood documents to him now, you could push him into making a mistake that hurts thousands of employees." The words landed exactly where Richard intended. Sophie thought of the people celebrating downstairs, the engineers who had embraced former mentors, and the workers who believed Ethan would protect their jobs. Richard was not asking her to trust him. He was asking her to fear what might happen if she trusted herself. Before she could answer, Ethan opened the door. Relief crossed his face when he saw them. Richard immediately placed a reassuring hand on Sophie's shoulder. "She found some old files from Nora and got worried," he said. "I was explaining that the trust review is meant to protect both of you." Ethan looked at his daughter. "Is that true?" Sophie saw Richard watching her from the corner of his eye. She almost told Ethan about the video, the backup account, and the memory card hidden in her shoe. Then she remembered the login warning. Someone had accessed Nora's safeguard the moment she opened it. "I found old pictures," she said carefully. Richard smiled. Ethan exhaled and pulled her into a brief hug. Over his shoulder, Sophie watched Richard take out his phone and send a silent message. Less than 10 seconds later, every light on the executive floor flickered. Ethan's phone displayed a security alert. His executive access had been revoked. Richard stared at the screen as though surprised, but Sophie saw the message still open on his phone. It contained only 6 words. Remove Ethan before the midnight transfer. The person Sophie thought was leading the takeover was only another piece on the board, and the real architect had been standing beside Ethan all night. The security alert spread across the executive floor within seconds. Ethan tried his badge at the private elevator, then at the glass doors leading to the operations center, but every reader flashed red. Richard stepped forward with practiced concern. It may be an automated lockout, he said. I'll call security. Sophie watched him make the call, but she had already seen the message on his phone. Before she could warn her father, Lauren appeared from the hallway with Charles Bennett and 2 board members. She looked calm, almost apologetic. Ethan, the governance system triggered a temporary restriction because of tonight's emergency review, she said. No one is accusing you of anything. Ethan's eyes hardened. Then restore my access. We can't override a board protection protocol once it begins. Lauren glanced at Sophie as though noticing her for the first time. This is exactly why we should keep family matters away from the company floor. The remark sounded harmless, but Sophie understood the warning beneath it. Lauren knew she had been listening. Ethan demanded an explanation, yet Margaret entered before anyone answered. She took his arm and urged him not to create a scene during the anniversary celebration. For one painful moment, Ethan looked at his mother, brother, and sister as though searching their faces for the family he believed he knew. Then the ballroom erupted in applause below as his name was announced for the closing speech. Lauren smiled gently. Go finish the evening. We'll resolve this after the review. Ethan hesitated, then returned downstairs because hundreds of employees were waiting for him. Sophie remained behind, pretending to search for her coat until the adults moved toward the conference room. The moment they disappeared, she slipped into a service stairwell and called Maya Torres, Caldwell Meridian's director of internal audit and one of the few people at the company who still sent Sophie a birthday card every year. Maya answered on the 3rd ring. Sophie told her about the trust transfer, Nora's video, and a message on Richard's phone. There was a long silence. Do not send me the file through the company network, Maya said. Meet me in the archive room on level 26. 10 minutes later, Maya inserted Nora's memory card into a clean laptop isolated from the company network. The emergency account showed several failed access attempts, followed by one successful login tied to Richard's executive credentials. But the financial records told a different story. Richard had approved documents, yet every transfer instruction originated from Lauren's office. A consulting company registered in Delaware had received 3 confidential payments totaling $4 million, all routed through Lauren's private authorization chain. Maya opened the ownership file and found Lauren listed as the beneficial owner behind a trust-controlled holding company. Richard is signing what she puts in front of him, Maya said quietly. But he's not the one getting paid. Sophie felt the shape of the betrayal change. What about Grandma? Maya reviewed Margaret's documents. The older woman had approved a temporary leadership transfer, but the attached summary made no mention of selling the healthcare research division. Lauren had replaced the full transaction packet with a shorter version before Margaret signed. Your grandmother thinks she is protecting the company, Maya said. She does not know Lauren plans to break it apart. Maya opened another file. A private equity agreement that would eliminate nearly 3,000 jobs and transfer Caldwell Meridian's most valuable medical patents after Ethan's removal. At the bottom was a payment schedule for Lauren, released only if the board declared Ethan unfit to remain in control. Maya used her phone to photograph the records, but every screen in the archive room suddenly went black. A red message appeared across the laptop. Audit access terminated. Then Sophie's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. You should have listened to your uncle. Just after midnight, Ethan Caldwell lost control of the company he built, and the vote removing him was cast with shares belonging to his own daughter. The anniversary celebration ended beneath forced smiles and empty champagne glasses, but before the last guests reached the elevators, Charles Bennett asked Ethan to come upstairs for an emergency board session. Sophie followed until Lauren stopped her outside the conference room. "This is not a place for children," she said. Ethan turned back, ready to argue, but Sophie shook her head as though she understood. What he did not see was the memory card still hidden inside her shoe, or Maya waiting 2 floors below with photographs of the financial records they had captured before the archive system shut down. Through the glass wall, Sophie watched Ethan take a seat at the long table. Margaret sat at one end, pale and rigid. Richard avoided his brother's eyes. Lauren placed a thick folder before each director and, invoking the company's emergency bylaws, calmly announced that concerns about Ethan's judgment required an immediate vote to appoint temporary leadership. Ethan laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the betrayal was finally too clear to deny. "You locked me out before the meeting," he said. "You prepared the vote before anyone heard my response." Lauren folded her hands. "The company cannot wait for grief to stop affecting your decisions." Ethan looked toward Margaret. "Is that what you believe?" His mother's lips trembled. "I believe you need time to recover. From losing my wife, or from trusting my family." Margaret lowered her eyes. Charles read the resolution aloud. It accused Ethan of withholding financial risk reports, making unstable acquisitions, and creating a leadership crisis that threatened shareholders. Every claim had been built from decisions Lauren herself had pushed through his office, but the documents made Ethan appear reckless and isolated. When he demanded the complete financial packet, Lauren said his access had been suspended pending review. Then came the final blow. Sophie's trust shares, representing the deciding voting bloc, had been assigned to Margaret's temporary authority through an emergency consent form. The electronic record displayed Sophie Caldwell's name and the trustee's digital authorization beneath it. Ethan rose so quickly that his chair rolled backward across the floor. "My daughter did not approve this." Lauren remained calm. "Her trustee approved it legally. That is her name. It is authorization exercised on her behalf." Ethan turned toward Richard. "Did you know?" Richard's silence answered first. Then he whispered, "I thought it was temporary." Lauren called the vote. One director abstained. Charles hesitated long enough for Ethan to notice, but eventually raised his hand. Margaret voted yes with tears in her eyes. Richard followed. The resolution passed. Ethan Caldwell was removed as chief executive and barred from accessing company systems until the board completed its investigation. Lauren was appointed interim CEO. Outside the room, Sophie watched her father's face change from fury to something quieter and more devastating. He had spent years believing wealth and influence could protect the people he loved, yet he had failed to protect his daughter's name from his own family. When the doors opened, Ethan walked past everyone and stopped in front of Sophie. "You were telling the truth," he said, his voice breaking. Sophie did not say she had warned him. She simply took his hand. Security officers escorted them to Ethan's office, where he was given 10 minutes to collect personal belongings. He placed Nora's framed photograph into a cardboard box, then stared across the city he had once believed he controlled. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you," he said. Sophie pulled Nora's memory card from her shoe and placed it in his palm. "Mom believed both of us," she answered. Ethan looked at the tiny card. But before he could ask what it contained, the television mounted on his office wall switched to the company's internal broadcast. Lauren appeared at the boardroom podium, delivering a brief overnight statement announcing Ethan's removal. Behind her, Caldwell Meridian's stock price began climbing. Then, despite his revoked credentials, a private message flashed across Ethan's computer screen from Nora's hidden account. First, safeguard failed. 2 remain. The company believed Nora Caldwell had left behind memories, but what she had really left behind was a map to expose everyone who betrayed her family. Ethan and Sophie left the headquarters shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, carrying only a cardboard box, Nora's camera, and the crushing silence that follows a life-changing defeat. Reporters had already gathered outside the building, shouting questions as Lauren's statement spread across every financial news network. Ethan ignored every microphone. For the first time in 20 years, he walked away from Caldwell Meridian without a security badge, without an office, and without the authority to protect the company he had built. They drove home through nearly empty Chicago streets until Sophie finally broke the silence. Mom said there were two safeguards left. Ethan looked at the memory card resting in his hand. Then we find them. Inside the house. Nothing had changed since they left for the anniversary dinner. Yet everything felt different. Nora's piano remained in the living room. Family photographs still lined the hallway, and an old oak leaf Sophie had pressed into a scrapbook years earlier rested inside a glass frame near the fireplace. Ethan inserted the hidden memory card into a personal laptop that had never been connected to the company network. Nora's recorded message appeared again, but this time another option had become visible beneath the first video. Family verification required. Ethan clicked the file. Nora smiled warmly from the screen, as though she knew this moment would eventually arrive. If the first safeguard has failed, she said, then someone has already convinced our family that control matters more than purpose. The second belongs to the people who remember why this company was created. A secure verification window opened with 3 questions. Where did Ethan propose to Nora? What song was playing when Sophie was born? What name did Sophie give the old oak tree behind their first home? Ethan answered the first immediately. He had proposed on the North Pier overlooking Lake Michigan during the city's annual fireworks celebration. Sophie answered the second without hesitation. Nora had always sung "What a Wonderful World" whenever they watched old family videos. Both answers turned green. The third question stopped them. Ethan remembered planting the oak with Sophie, but not the childish nickname she had given it when she was 5. Sophie walked toward the framed scrapbook leaf and smiled through tears. Mom laughed because I thought every tree deserved a real name. She typed 2 simple words, Captain Branch. The screen unlocked instantly. A hidden archive appeared containing encrypted records, board communications, legal memoranda, and one final video recorded by Nora only hours before her accident. If you are seeing this, Nora said softly, the people closest to us have already forgotten why Caldwell Meridian exists. Do not waste your energy proving they betrayed you. Prove what they betrayed. She revealed that the company's founding charter contained a protected mission clause requiring any sale or division of the Healthcare Research Division to receive approval from an independent medical ethics council before becoming legally enforceable. Lauren had hidden the clause from every transaction summary because it would delay the acquisition for months. Even more astonishing, Nora had secretly appointed Charles Bennett as the independent custodian responsible for preserving the charter and activating the final safeguard if Ethan were ever removed under suspicious circumstances. Ethan stared at the screen. Charles never told me. Nora answered as though she could hear him. Because he promised me he never would unless our family stopped protecting one another. Just then, Ethan's phone rang. Charles Bennett spoke in a trembling voice. I made the biggest mistake of my career tonight, he admitted. Lauren never showed the full agreement to the board. I just compared her packet with the original files. Ethan remained silent. Charles continued, meet me at the old research laboratory before sunrise. I have something Lauren believes was destroyed. Before sunrise, Ethan walked into the abandoned laboratory expecting evidence against Lauren, but what Charles Bennett handed him could destroy every lie used to remove him. The old Caldwell Meridian Research Facility stood 4 miles from downtown Chicago, sealed behind rusted gates and dark windows since the company moved its scientists to a newer campus. Charles waited inside the original conference room beneath a single emergency light, holding a fireproof document case against his chest. Maya Torres was already there with photographs of the financial records she had captured before Lauren terminated her access. When Ethan and Sophie entered, Charles looked at the girl before he looked at her father. You told the truth before any of us had the courage to hear it, he said. Sophie did not answer. Charles placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside were Nora's original corporate charter, a signed ethics council agreement, and an audio recorder containing private meetings from the previous 6 months. Charles admitted that Nora had asked him to preserve the materials outside company headquarters because she feared someone might eventually alter the official records. He had kept his promise until Lauren convinced him that Ethan's grief had made him reckless. I thought removing you temporarily would protect the company, Charles said. I did not know she planned to sell its research, eliminate thousands of jobs, and pay herself through a hidden firm. Ethan's anger rose, but Sophie touched his hand. Nora's warning echoed between them. Understand what people fear before deciding who they are. Charles activated the recorder. Lauren's voice filled the empty room as she directed that Richard's credentials be used to enter the emergency account, that Margaret receive the shortened resolution, and that Charles be pressured into supporting Ethan's removal. Then another recording played. Richard was arguing with Lauren, insisting that the transfer remain temporary. Lauren responded that once Ethan was removed, Richard would either cooperate or be blamed for the false authorization. Richard had not designed the trap. He had stepped into it and kept walking because exposing Lauren would also expose his own part in the betrayal. Maya arranged the evidence into a clear sequence. Lauren's payments, the altered board packet, Richard's login, Sophie's unauthorized consent, and the private equity agreement. It was enough to stop the sale, but Ethan knew documents alone could still be buried beneath lawyers and public relations. Every director needs to hear this at the same time, he said. Charles revealed that Lauren had scheduled a live press conference for 8 that morning to announce a strategic partnership and position herself as Caldwell Meridian's permanent leader. The full board, major investors, employees, and national business reporters would be watching. Ethan could interrupt it by invoking Nora's ethics clause, but doing so would immediately freeze the healthcare division, suspend the board's authority over the transaction, and place temporary control in the hands of an independent counsel. It would stop Lauren, yet Ethan would not automatically regain his company. That is Nora's final safeguard, Charles explained. She designed it so no Caldwell could use the crisis to seize power, not even you. Ethan stared at the original charter. To expose Lauren publicly, he would have to surrender the very control his family had tried to steal. At 7:58 a.m., Lauren stepped onto the main auditorium stage before hundreds of employees and dozens of cameras. Margaret sat behind her, visibly shaken. Richard stood near the curtain, looking like a man waiting for a sentence to be delivered. Lauren began speaking about stability, responsibility, and a new future. 2 minutes into the broadcast, every screen behind her went black. Nora Caldwell's recorded image appeared above the stage. Then Ethan, Sophie, Maya, and Charles entered through the center aisle. Lauren's face lost its calm. Ethan stopped beneath the lights and raised the original charter. Before you announce the future of this company, he said, everyone deserves to hear how you try to steal it. The greatest victory Ethan Caldwell ever achieved was not winning back his company. It was choosing to save its purpose even if doing so cost him the power to control it. Silence swept across the auditorium as Nora Caldwell's recorded message filled every screen. Employees who had spent years developing life-saving medical technology stood frozen while investors exchanged uneasy glances. Lauren tried to regain control of the stage, but Charles Bennett stepped forward before she could speak. Holding Nora's original corporate charter in one hand and the recorder in the other, he admitted every mistake he had made. He confessed that Lauren had manipulated the board with incomplete documents, concealed the mission clause protecting the healthcare division, and arranged secret payments through a consulting company she controlled. Maya Torres displayed the financial records beside the recordings, allowing every director, reporter, investor, and employee to follow the evidence step by step. Richard lowered his head before anyone accused him. He admitted that he had allowed Lauren to use his executive credentials and had convinced himself the transfer would only be temporary. I betrayed my brother because I was afraid the company would collapse, he said. Instead, I nearly destroyed everything Nora built. Margaret slowly rose from her chair, her hands trembling. Tears filled her eyes as she looked toward Ethan and Sophie. I signed those documents believing I was protecting my son, she whispered. I never saw the pages Lauren removed. Lauren laughed once, but the confidence that had carried her through the previous night was gone. She insisted that the company needed stronger leadership and claimed every decision had been made for shareholders. Ethan looked directly at her before turning toward the thousands of employees watching the live broadcast across every Caldwell Meridian campus. This company was never built for shareholders alone, he said. It was built so families could have better treatments, better technology, and more hope than they had yesterday. He placed the original charter on the podium and formally invoked Nora's final safeguard. Within seconds, an independent medical ethics council assumed temporary authority over the healthcare division. Every acquisition agreement was frozen. The planned sale was suspended, and Lauren's authority over the transaction was automatically revoked under the company's founding rules. Reporters rushed to verify the announcement, while directors stared at the charter they had never fully read. Ethan did not ask for his position back. Instead, he formally requested that the independent counsel oversee the company until every transaction and allegation could be reviewed without family influence. Charles looked at him in disbelief. You could fight to reclaim control today. Ethan slowly shook his head. If I take the company back before rebuilding its integrity, then Lauren was right about one thing. Control would matter more than purpose. Those words changed the room more than any document could. Richard quietly crossed the stage and apologized to his brother in front of everyone, but Ethan did not offer immediate forgiveness. Margaret embraced Sophie through tears, asking for forgiveness she knew she had not earned. Investigators who had been alerted by Maya arrived with copies of the altered records, the payment trail, and the hidden agreements. Lauren was escorted away for questioning as the board suspended her and opened a formal investigation. Months later, the independent review cleared Ethan of every allegation. The healthcare division remained intact. Nearly 3,000 jobs were protected, and the board invited him to return as chief executive. He accepted only after every governance reform Nora had designed was permanently adopted. Sophie's trust was placed under independent supervision, and no Caldwell family member could ever again use it to control the company. On his first morning back, Ethan did not walk into the executive boardroom. Instead, he stood beside Sophie beneath the old oak tree behind their first family home. The little plaque she had made as a child still read Captain Branch. Ethan smiled through grateful tears. Your mom saved this company. Sophie gently squeezed his hand and looked toward the morning sunlight shining through the leaves. She showed us how to save each other first.